I think this is probably the worst time ever in the history of Pakistan, and that's not an overstatement.
This is Global Insights by Network 2020. Today, we're talking about Pakistan. The country is currently facing a trifecta of crises: an economic crisis, a political crisis, and a security crisis that has grown in the wake of the fall of Kabul. These interlocking challenges have been exacerbated by factors such as devastating floods, rising inflation, and the resurgence of terrorism. After this briefing was recorded, security forces entered a courthouse in the Pakistani capital of Islamabad to detain former Prime Minister Imran Khan, being charged with several corruption cases that he claims are politically motivated. So, how can Pakistan possibly address all of these challenges at once? And what can the international community do to promote stability in this nuclear-armed state? Joining us today is Shuja, a premier expert on Pakistan in the United States, political and strategic analyst, and the first director of the South Asia Center at the Atlantic Council. He has advised or briefed senior government and military officials and parliamentarians in the United States, Europe, and Pakistan. Moderating the discussion is Courtney Doggart, president of Network 2020.
Situation in Pakistan right now, and is it accurate to put all three of the challenges, the economic, the security, the political, on the same level, or is there one that in your mind is more acute?
Courtney, I think this is probably the worst time ever in the history of Pakistan, and that's not an overstatement. It is a combination of different crises. You've mentioned economic, political, and security, and overlaying it all is the overarching constitutional crisis that potentially could tear the country apart because of the differences between the provinces and the center. This is against the backdrop of recent challenges, which include the war in Ukraine, that has affected global supply chains, that has affected Pakistan's ability to import wheat, which it needs to feed its people. It also includes the recent flooding, which was, one of those 100-year floods, which is now being repeated almost every second or third year in Pakistan. And the effects of those floods have not yet been surmounted by Pakistan. So it's going to affect its production of crops for the next year at least, and it will affect its exports for the next year or more. So the other problem is the dire economic straits in which Pakistan finds itself, where its growth rate, which used to be in the 6 to 7% annually, has now been downgraded to 0.4%, which is even lower than it was during the COVID pandemic, which was the other crisis that it had to surmount in recent years. And so, as a result, Pakistan has an unfinished negotiation with the International Monetary Fund, which is critical to its economic future, because until and unless the IMF agrees to a program and renews funding for Pakistan, additional funds that are waiting to be dispersed for Pakistan from the World Bank, the Asian Development Bank, the Asian Investment Bank in China, and other entities in the private sector are all on hold. On top of it, the political crisis within the country has extended the poor governance that was evident during the period of Imran Khan, who is very popular and is becoming more popular in the street as we speak, but showed an inability to govern and showed an inability to create a big tent approach to politics in Pakistan. And only now is talking about the need to have some kind of a unity government. So it's the crisis of all crises, or as we once heard about Iraq, the mother of all battles. This is the mother of all crises for Pakistan.
Thank you for starting us off there. You mentioned in the very beginning the constitutional crisis and the fact that the center and the regions are seeming to be pulling apart. Could you please just go into a little bit more depth about the constitutional crisis that Pakistan is facing, and in particular, I think the relationship between the Supreme Court of Pakistan and the Parliament and how that's affecting the situation?
Certainly. And it's not just the Supreme Court of Pakistan and Parliament. There are a couple of other players that I should mention. One is the President of Pakistan, who is the titular head of the state. The head of government is the Prime Minister, but the head of state is the President. And the President has to sign off on legislation. And he has actually turned back a couple of pieces of legislation that Parliament has passed in order to curtail the powers of the Supreme Court. But the government has proceeded to reenact the same bills and now says it doesn't need the president's approval and that it is now law, and therefore it wants to cut the feathers of the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court and his ability to take note of issues on a suo motu basis, meaning that he can autonomously take note of an issue and bring it to the court, and with whatever formation of a bench that he creates, he can then pronounce judgment, and even has attempted something which has never happened before in Pakistan, attempted to nullify a law that Parliament intended to pass. It hadn't yet passed it. So this is creating a very unique kind of situation. As in all such matters, the calendar is important. Pakistan at the moment has two major provinces, Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, which was previously the stronghold of Imran Khan's party, and the Punjab province, where he lost out in the end to a coalition of opponents. And in the Punjab, which is the largest single province in the country, there is a caretaker government, which under the law can only be in existence for 90 days, and it must hold elections to the provincial assembly within 90 days. And this crisis was brought about by the resignation of Imran Khan's party members from parliament, from the provincial parliaments, from the provincial assemblies. And so the moment caretakers were appointed, they had 90 days to hold elections. So we're supposed to have elections next month on the 14th of May, but there doesn't seem to be any sign that that's happening. And there's a reason for it, and I'll go into a little detail. This is going into the weeds, but it will bring up a bigger issue, which is the structural issue of where power resides in Pakistan. The Election Commission of Pakistan put forward 7 points identifying why it was difficult, if not impossible, to hold elections in this short-term period, and wanted to extend the caretaker governments in these two provinces. And point number 7, which they hid in the middle of their presentation, was that they had been briefed by the Director General Military Operations of the Pakistan Army that the military was unable to provide security for elections And because of the security situation in the country, which had deteriorated with the resurgence of terrorism and militancy in the country. And therefore, it would not be possible to get people to come to the polls without any unrest. So that was essentially a kind of a military veto of the idea of elections. And it essentially sent a message to everyone that the new head of the military did not wish to fall in line with the approach of Imran Khan, with whom he had had a falling out because Imran Khan had him removed as the head of the inter-services intelligence after 8 months only. And so there's some history between the two gentlemen. Another point that came out was from the retired military head of the National Disaster Management Agency. Now, normally this would not be a political agency, but the announcement from the NDMA head, a former general, a retired general, was that they expected serious natural disasters in the country in the coming months. And therefore, they were preparing for those, and therefore holding elections in the middle of natural disasters would be impossible. The third factor which people are now talking about is the fact that Pakistan very rarely, if ever, holds elections in the summer because temperatures are so high, particularly in the plains and in the south, that people can't afford to stand out for hours in long lines in order to vote. And so it'll create a health crisis, among other things. What many observers, including myself, have said, that there is more than a subtle signal on the part of the military not to concede to Imran Khan's wishes of having a quick election so that he can ride the wave of populism that he has created through his street protests and his ability to influence the youth of Pakistan, which is the single largest age group in the country now, particularly the urban youth, to whom he appeals very strongly, and that have come out in support of him in very large numbers whenever he's been allowed to hold rallies. Making things difficult has been the government's ability through fiat and ordinance, and using an organization called the Pakistan Electronic Media Regulatory Agency, PEMRA for short, which forbade live broadcast of any of Imran Khan's speeches so that he couldn't reach out to his audiences throughout the country. So clearly the die has been cast in the future of Pakistani politics on behalf of the military in order to ensure that Imran Khan can somehow be either disqualified or sidelined politically. That seems to be the result of all these machinations at this point.
Thank you. So it's interesting because it sounds like, on the one hand, you've described these power nodes, these other agencies that clearly have their own agenda, Imran's inability to kind of create this big tent coalition to govern effectively, but yet is still very popular, it sounds like, particularly among youth. So can you explain what that one, if I'm describing that picture correctly, and then two, what does that say about where society is and what the relationship is between society and the government at the moment?
Your description is accurate. It captures the essence of what I was saying. And I should add also that the Supreme Court's Chief Justice is only in office till September, when his term expires, and the next person in line to be the Chief Justice of Pakistan is Justice Qazi Faiz Isa from Balochistan, who has in the past had a reputation of being somewhat of a maverick. He has been very rough on the military in the way it handled affairs in Balochistan, but he has also done things when he moved to the center in the Supreme Court and was presiding over cases which made decisions that the military wanted made. And so Qazi Faiz Isa is a little unknown quantity, and he will be Supreme Court Justice for another 18 months, and he will have a powerful effect on politics and economics in the country beyond September. And so there's the issue of the current Chief Justice who doesn't get along with him, trying to get things done before he leaves, even to the extent of trying to discredit Justice Isa in some on some issues. So that's kind of part of the Machiavellian activities behind the scenes that have been affecting decision making in Pakistan.
Okay, terrific. Thank you. So just to dig in a little bit more, what are some of the social issues in contemporary Pakistan that are exacerbating or contributing to this trifecta of problems that you're seeing? And,
well,
and if you could talk a little bit about some more of the internal divisions that you're seeing.
Well, the social and economic issues are related. They go hand in hand. And Pakistan's economy has suffered tremendously. As I mentioned, growth is down to 0.4%. Inflation, according to the latest monthly figures, is above 47%. Food inflation is above 50%. And the poorest segments of society throughout the country, in the cities as well as in the agricultural part of the country, in the rural part of the country, people spend more than 50% of their income on food. So they've been particularly hard hit by the inflation tax, which is the worst kind of tax for poor people in any country. In addition, the economic crisis brought about by global events, by natural disasters, and by misgovernment or misgovernance has reduced the size of the middle class in Pakistan. I think the last time we spoke, I may have referred to the fact that Pakistan had a growing middle class of something like 53 million people out of a population at that time of about 200 million. The population now is north of 230 million. The middle class has fallen partly as a result of COVID and natural disasters from 50 million odd to 22 million. That's not good news because that is the economic and political and social backbone of the country. And that is where the military also is recruiting its officers from the petty bourgeoisie and the cities. And so people in the military are very aware of the challenges they face. This is raising a new tension, which has never been seen before. And the tension is a public criticism of the military in Pakistan by political parties and by civic groups and others, which has become more and more common. And this has put the military on edge and on alert, because they don't quite know how to deal with this, particularly when it comes to use of social media by youth to spread the word against the military. So that's a completely new development. More worrisome is, and my mentor and my respected guide, Frank Wisner, will probably understand that best of everyone in this chat room. The military is divided now between the senior people and the junior people on the basis of wealth. This is a visible issue where it is clear that people, once they become red tabs, brigadiers, major generals and above, are able to acquire entitlements that allow them to accumulate wealth at a rapid click, including subsidized land, including double dipping after retirement, and they retire at an early age, taking over state enterprises or being given diplomatic posts or other positions. Whereas people at the lieutenant, captain, major, up to colonel level who are commanding troops and who are actually fighting and dying in the battle against the insurgency in Fatah and other parts of the country, are struggling, like their other civilian relatives, to survive because their salaries can't keep up with inflation. And they have to maintain a certain lifestyle and they have to send their children to school. And so this is creating an internal tension within the military. And very interestingly, the army has changed and is now trying to deal with this. And if you allow me, I will digress to talk a bit about the changes within the army, because that's the subject of my new book.
Yes, please. I was about to stay on this, so yes.
General Asim Munir, who is the new army chief and former DG ISI, is not from the elite Pakistan military academy in Kabul, where traditionally, which is the kind of West Point of Pakistan, where all the officer class comes from normally. He is from the OTS, the Officer Training School at Mangla, which is a shorter one-year course, in which he did very well. He won the Sword of Honor in the 57th OTS course. And I have a picture of him on his graduation because one of my cousins was his commandant. He was the general in charge of the OTS from that time. And I see this very smart, very bright officer who made it to 3 stars in a very competitive Pakistan army, made it to head of DGISI, to head the Inter-Services Intelligence, and is now the army chief. And he has selected as his chief of general staff another 3-star who is also from OTS. And that's his right-hand man, a general called Saeed, who used to work with General Kiani as his personal secretary at one time. So there is a kind of a class distinction that one must recognize within the military. And this is a reality that has always confronted people in the military, that they always saw this class distinction between the graduates of the military academy and graduates of the shorter one-year officer training school. And so there's some tension there. Now, General Asim Munir has done something very interesting recently. He's actually put forward and issued an order creating a new plan under which junior officers can get access to subsidized housing for themselves, which the military will allow them to pay for on a part-time basis. They will, have small payments throughout their service so that by the time they get in their retirement, they have an apartment or a house that the military will build for them on subsidized land at subsidized rates. So this is seen by people within the country and within the military as a way of winning back the junior officers in the Pakistan Army. So it's a very interesting development. We have to see how it goes. And I don't know if we are going to witness, Ambassador Wisner, a creation of an Egypt on the Indus after having seen the creation of a Pakistan on the Nile.
Thank you very much for that. And it's interesting to hear about, such a powerful institution in Pakistan be what seems to be actually like fairly dynamic and responsive, at least to the situation. I'd like to just switch gears a little bit and talk about the United States. So in your book, The Battle for Pakistan, you define the relationship between the US and Pakistan to be one of a misalliance, sort of a marriage of unequal parts. What do you mean by that, if you wouldn't mind just giving a quick overview? And how have recent events in Afghanistan shaped this misalliance? And where do you see Biden's approach headed?
Well, thank you for bringing that up. That was actually the original title of my book that eventually the publishers thought was too nerdy and thought The Battle for Pakistan would be a better title. And I borrowed it, of course, from George Bernard Shaw and his play, which was the story of an unequal marriage, a misalliance. And that accurately reflects the relationship between the United States and Pakistan, because the US had a very powerful influence. It used Pakistan as a regional entity as part of its global or regional strategy for Asia and the Middle East, and its global strategy against the former Soviet Union, and then against Russia, and now against China. But that situation has changed dramatically. And it changed during the Trump administration when aid to Pakistan, which was a very major source of leverage for the United States, almost went down to zero. So military relationships were ended, training was stopped, and only money for certain selected civil society projects was going through to Pakistan. So from a height of north of $1 billion a year on average of economic assistance and financial assistance, the Pakistanis were down to something like 300 million a year programmed. Not all of it made it to Pakistan. And so this has created a new reality where the US can only use moral suasion with Pakistan, and it hasn't worked too well. At the same time, the Indo-Pacific strategy of the United States has shifted the US's focus to India. And India is a willing participant in that. It has its own interests in Southeast Asia, which may not be 100% congruent with US interests, but it is willing to go along with the United States and its other partners in order to take advantage of whatever moves can be made to grab the economic pie within the Indo-Pacific. There are, of course, security issues related to that because India has a growing economy, a very powerful growing navy also, and a strong presence in the Bay of Bengal, and an ability to close down the Straits of Malacca in case it wants to restrict China from entering the Indian Ocean or the Arabian Sea, etc. So all of these factors are at play in the way Pakistan is being perceived in Washington today, and how Washington perceives Pakistan. My understanding is that, at least in the White House, where the Indo-Pacific strategy is headquartered, Pakistan is already seen in China's camp, along with a few countries in Africa. And I think that would be a mistake, because there are elements within Pakistan, including powerful elements within the military, that would not want to break the ties with the United States. And so there has been a small effort recently at reopening some of the training for Pakistan military and reopening some of the flows of equipment and spare parts in order to keep the Pakistani military afloat. Now, recently, a report has emerged in Pakistan of a briefing that the former Army Chief General Bajwa gave to 20 journalists, in which he was either dissembling or bringing them into his confidence. And it's hard to have a background briefing with 20 journalists and nothing will leak to the world outside. But he essentially said to them words to the effect that the Pakistan army was unable to fight. It was restricted in its ability to fight because it didn't have the fuel, nor did it have the equipment and the ammunition, etc. And so if that is correct, that is a very dire warning for Pakistan as a whole, because it will show a weakness, which obviously will be picked up on the Indian side by the more hawkish elements of Prime Minister Modi's government. And at any moment, anything could happen that could create a conflagration. The good thing is that the line of control between India and Pakistan has been very quiet. And I think the kudos goes to both sides for maintaining that quiet. And I think that is something that the US also wishes would remain so, because if they talk to each other, then it's much better than having them prepare for conflict, in which the US will be asked to pick sides, and that will be a very difficult decision.
Thank you. One final question before I open it up to everybody else. And this would be the look ahead. And it seems like such a very difficult question to ask given the dire situation you've painted. And I guess I would ask it as this. Who has the power to make some sort of positive change in Pakistan? And what is it that would need to be done for that to happen? Do you see that happening?
You know, I've always been accused of being an optimist. But a good friend once said to me that a pessimist is an optimist with experience. So I have to be modest and humble in my ability to look at the future. But I do see a great possibility of unleashing the power of business in Pakistan and of the middle class. And it will mean that Parliament will have to take itself seriously and become part of the tax net to begin with. In 2013, half the members of Parliament paid no income tax. That's not a good example to set for the rest of the country. And so political parties which are dynastic have to stop ruling the country and ruling their parties as family businesses. Imran Khan had an advantage over the dynastic parties, which also includes a major religious group, the Jamiat-e-Ulama-e-Islam of Maulana Fazlur Rahman. So Imran Khan was not dynastic, he was by himself. But that's a strength and a weakness. And the weakness is that if he disappears or is disqualified, his party will break up. They'll go back to the other parties. So the business community and the middle class and civic society have to coalesce in order to preserve the union and to preserve a relationship between the center and the federal units, to which the Constitution has devolved a lot of responsibilities. Almost all development work is in the provinces now. But the resources are not there, they're not being generated. Pakistan relies primarily on remittances from its workers overseas to the tune of $31 billion a year in order to stay afloat. But it needs to export. And its export regime has been marked by corruption, where favored textile and other industrialists are given subsidies to export and have not gone out and created new markets or new products to export. So Pakistan has been increasingly putting money into those subsidies, and it is increasingly putting money into state-owned enterprises, including the expanding economic footprint of the military, which is now into selling goat meat. You know, it used to sell cornflakes. They're now into construction in the civil sector throughout the country instead of only in the border regions where security demands that they do the construction. And state-owned enterprises are an enormous hemorrhage in the economy of the country. The country is losing something like 0.5% of its GDP every year in the losses of the state-owned enterprises that the government then has to use deficit financing in order to fill those losses. So this can change. And it can change if the government decides that it will shed its losses. If it also decides, following the Chinese model, that military enterprises will be divested and they will become strong private sector enterprises, and the business community has the wherewithal to buy them. So the way the PLA Inc. was dissolved in China and you had a giant like Huawei emerge, you could have Pakistani businesses acquiring the assets of military enterprises that have a stranglehold on different sectors within the country and make them successful and competitive globally, not just within Pakistan. So all this is possible. Now, and I cite this because there is tremendous growth in the technology sector. The women in Pakistan have now entered the workplace, though in a much smaller proportion than Bangladesh. It's only 22% of the labor market, as opposed to 41% in Bangladesh. But they are doing innovative things. They're entering into technology, they're entering into education, they're using technology to spread education, and that will transform the country, so long as the obstacles of the heavy hand of government, corruption, a tax system which is subject to corruption, and the bureaucracy which refuses to allow people to operate in a free economy. All those don't stop this change from occurring. The change is there, the people are there. And I'm often asked, do we have to bring back the diaspora Pakistanis? I say no. You've got the expertise, and you can and you should do it yourself.
For more insight and analysis on global issues, and to learn more about how you can join our community, visit us at network2020.org.